A determined young girl with a prosthetic leg embarks on an extraordinary journey in the remote, rugged mountains. In this unforgiving wilderness, she forges an unlikely yet profound bond with a wild horse, a connection that brings her solace and newfound strength amid her struggles. The story begins with a promise of courage and resilience. When a violent storm suddenly traps a group of hikers in peril, she and the majestic horse must brave treacherous terrain to protect them. How will this incredible journey of valor and perseverance unfold? Let us delve into this tale together, and before we explore every detail of their adventure, please share in the comments where you are watching or listening from. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because your support fuels our ability to share these moving, impactful stories. At the break of dawn, the early morning sun cast a pale, gentle light over a small, weathered cabin that nestled high among the craggy mountain peaks. The cabin, though modest in size, seemed perfectly integrated into its surroundings, a silent sentinel amid the wild, its wooden walls imbued with the history of countless seasons. Outside, the air was crisp with the scent of pine, and the distant calls of birds echoed softly through the valley, adding an element of quiet wonder to the rugged landscape. Inside the cabin, Hannah Reed awoke to the soft chirping of birds and the faint murmur of the wind outside. She sat at the edge of her narrow bed, her gaze lingering on the muted glow of the morning light filtering through a small window. There, on the wall, hung her prosthetic, a sleek, metallic limb that bore the marks of countless hours spent traversing uneven trails. Today, like every day since the accident, Hannah would have to face the world with this constant reminder of both loss and survival. With deliberate care, she pulled on a thick wool sock over her remaining leg. Her white skin still bore the gentle imprint of where her natural limb had met the cuff, a tender scar from hours spent hiking and bearing not just physical discomfort but the weight of a life forever altered. As her fingers traced the smooth metal of her prosthetic, she paused for a moment, as if drawing strength from its cool, unyielding surface. In that silent moment, she acknowledged both the pain of what had been lost and the resilience that had been born in its place. Her long auburn hair, unbrushed and wild as the surrounding landscape, cascaded loosely over her shoulders, mirroring the untamed beauty of the wilderness outside. Once, her blue-gray eyes had sparkled with laughter and light, but now they held a quiet intensity, an expression sharpened by the many struggles and losses she had endured. Slowly, almost ritualistically, Hannah steadied herself and allowed the prosthetic to click securely into place. The soft fabric of her faded flannel shirt, its red and black checks a comforting echo of simpler times, brushed gently against her arms. Her jeans, patched at the knees from long, arduous hikes, hung loosely over a pair of sturdy, well-worn hiking boots that had seen countless miles of rugged paths. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the towering pines, the ground outside came alive with shifting patterns of golden light and deep shadow. Hannah stepped onto the creaking porch, each wooden board groaning softly beneath her weight. She drew in a deep, steadying breath, savoring the crisp mountain air, a blend of pine and damp earth that filled her lungs with both hope and a bittersweet reminder of what she had lost. Before her stretched a breathtaking panorama, rolling hills draped in a gentle mist, with distant mountain peaks rising like ancient sentinels guarding the secrets of the wilderness. Yet, for all its serene beauty, the landscape could not erase the ache that had taken root within her heart. "Get over it," she murmured to herself, her voice barely more than a whisper laced with frustration and sorrow. It had been a year since the accident, the day a climbing fall had stolen her leg and forced her into a constant battle to reclaim her wholeness. Each morning, as she awoke to face the day, that same sense of loss loomed large, an unyielding companion that no amount of rugged beauty could completely dispel. Inside the cabin, the silence was eventually broken by the familiar, comforting call of her father. "Hannah, breakfast is ready." "I'll be there in a minute," he said, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of quiet concern. For years, John Reed's steady hands and wise, measured words had been her anchor in the turbulent aftermath of the accident. Yet, despite his unwavering presence, a deep isolation still clung to her, an internal barrier she could neither fully overcome nor completely understand. Rather than retreat inside to join him, Hannah chose instead to step out into the wild embrace of the surrounding forest. She walked slowly toward the tree-line, her steps measured and careful as the prosthetic adjusted to the uneven incline. The woods welcomed her with cool, gentle shadows, and for the first time that day, she felt a semblance of peace in the sanctuary of nature. Here, there were no pitying stares or whispered questions, only the quiet company of rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of a hidden bird. In this unspoken solitude, she was free to simply exist, to confront her own inner world away from the expectations of others. It was in this tranquil refuge that something remarkable caught her eye, a fleeting, almost ethereal presence that would change everything. As she reached the edge of a gently babbling creek, where the water danced softly over time-worn rocks and sunlight broke through the canopy in scattered shimmering patches, she saw him for the first time. There, standing just beyond the tree line, was a wild horse. His coat, a deep and mysterious black, shimmered faintly in the interplay of light and shadow. His ears twitched at the sound of the flowing water, and though his dark eyes were fixed intently on her, there was a quality of wild, untamed curiosity in his gaze. Hannah's breath caught in her throat as she beheld the creature. In that singular moment, time seemed to slow. A silent exchange of vulnerability and quiet strength passed between them. The horse, untamed and free, exuded an air of both caution and defiant pride. His lean, muscular frame, his mane unruly and tangled, and his gaze so steadfast and unblinking stirred something deep within her. It was as if in him she saw not only a wild animal but a kindred spirit, a living symbol of resilience, mirroring her own hard-won determination to survive in a world that had been forever changed. Tentatively, Hannah took a step forward, her boots crunching softly on the underbrush. With a voice barely louder than the gentle murmur of the creek, she offered a quiet greeting, "Hey there." Her tone was gentle and unsure, yet laden with an unspoken invitation. For a moment, the world held its breath. The horse, wild and watchful, remained still, his posture tense and ready, as if he might bolt if she drew too near. Then, after what felt like an eternity, his dark eyes softened just a fraction, and he did not run. Instead, a fragile connection began to form in that hushed, suspended moment. In that instant, Hannah recognized that something extraordinary was beginning, a delicate bond forged in silence and mutual understanding, one that promised both hope and healing. As she slowly retreated back toward the cabin, her heart remained alight with the memory of that first, unforgettable encounter. The wild horse, with his mysterious gaze and untamed spirit, had etched himself into her very being, setting the stage for the journey of courage and resilience that was to follow. The following morning, as if orchestrated by nature itself, a gentle, pale light filtered through the aged cabin windows, warming the creaking wooden floorboards and casting long, graceful shadows that danced across the modest room. Inside, Hannah Reed sat quietly at a small kitchen table, idly picking at a plate of scrambled eggs that had lost much of their appeal in the soft morning hush. Across from her, her father, John Reed, cradled a steaming mug of coffee in hands weathered by time and hardship. His eyes, full of quiet concern and unspoken encouragement, followed her every movement as he prepared for the day ahead. "Are you heading out today?" he asked in a calm yet probing tone, a question that had become a ritual in their morning routine. His voice, gentle and steady, was meant to coax her out of her shell, yet it also carried the weight of years spent watching his daughter wrestle with both physical and emotional scars. For a moment, Hannah simply shrugged, deliberately avoiding his gaze as if to guard the fragile secret that lay within her heart. The events of the previous day, the encounter with that wild, untamed horse, had stirred something inside her, a delicate blend of hope and trepidation, and she wasn't yet ready to expose that vulnerability fully. Her father pressed on with soft insistence, trying to draw out more than her customary one-word answers, yet Hannah hesitated. She longed to speak of the horse, to describe how its eyes had met hers with an almost human understanding, and how that fleeting moment had awakened memories of resilience buried deep within her. But the memory was as fragile as the first light of dawn, too delicate, she feared, to be put into words lest its magic be lost. With a quiet shake of her head, she dismissed his inquiry, offering only the familiar, muted response that had come to define her guarded nature. John's face softened into a gentle frown, a mixture of paternal worry and quiet acceptance, and, after a long pause, he finally murmured, "Be careful out there." His words, though simple, resonated with the wisdom of a man who had seen too many storms both outside and within. Hannah nodded, her expression unreadable, and slowly reached for the jacket draped carelessly on the back of a chair. With measured resolve, she rose from the table, leaving behind the warm glow of the cabin for the unpredictable embrace of the wilderness. Stepping out onto the porch, Hannah was greeted by a world transformed by nature's caprice. The early light had softened the rugged outlines of the surrounding mountains, while the air, crisp and imbued with the scent of pine and wet earth, seemed to whisper promises of renewal. Yet, beneath the serene beauty lay an undercurrent of melancholy. Every step on the weathered wooden boards, every cautious movement as she adjusted her prosthetic leg to the uneven ground, echoed with the memory of loss and the weight of a year spent learning to live with scars both seen and unseen. As Hannah ventured away from the relative safety of the cabin, the forest welcomed her with open arms. The tall pines swayed gently in a mild breeze, their needles rustling softly, a natural symphony that mingled with the distant call of birds and the murmuring of a hidden creek. In this secluded sanctuary, she could almost forget the relentless questions and pitying stares of the outside world. Here, among the cool shadows and dappled sunlight, Hannah felt an ephemeral peace, an invitation to simply exist, unburdened by judgment. Her footsteps led her toward the creek, a familiar path that had become a quiet refuge in recent days. The forest floor, carpeted with fallen pine needles and scattered leaves, crunched softly under each careful step. In her backpack, she carried a modest offering, apples and a few carrots, small tokens of goodwill meant for a creature that had, in a single transcendent moment, altered the course of her solitary existence. Reaching the edge of the creek, Hannah paused, her eyes scanning the opposite bank where the water flowed gently over time-worn rocks. The surface shimmered with fleeting reflections of the emerging sun, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Then, as if summoned by fate, she saw him again, the wild horse whose presence had stirred something deep within her soul. He stood just beyond the tree line, his coat as dark as midnight and catching the sparse light in subtle glimmers. His ears twitched at the sound of the water, and though his dark eyes remained fixed upon her, there was an unmistakable air of curiosity mingled with a reserved caution. Hannah's heart fluttered at the sight, a mixture of excitement and tenderness surging through her. In that quiet, hushed moment, she felt as though time itself had slowed, allowing her to savor every detail, the gentle murmur of the creek, the soft rustling of leaves, and the profound silence that bound them together. Slowly, almost reverently, she crouched by the water's edge. From her bag, she withdrew an apple, a simple offering imbued with hope, and extended her palm in a silent greeting. "Hey there," she murmured softly, her voice gentle as if speaking to a long-lost friend. For an eternity in that stillness, the wild creature regarded her with cautious eyes, his muscles tensing in readiness for flight, yet he did not move. Instead, the silence deepened into a delicate communion, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Hannah remained perfectly still, each heartbeat echoing the unsteady rhythm of the wilderness around her. Gradually, the horse inched forward, his hooves softly crunching on the dry leaves scattered along the creek's edge. With each measured step, his nostrils flared as he absorbed the familiar scent of the forest and, perhaps, the comforting presence of the girl before him. "It's okay," she whispered, her tone soothing, imbued with both empathy and assurance. "I won't hurt you." The words, tender and earnest, seemed to bridge the gap between their disparate worlds, a quiet promise of mutual understanding. At last, the horse dipped his head and stepped closer, his velvety nose grazing her palm in a gesture as fragile as it was profound. In that moment, as he gently accepted the apple from her hand, an ineffable connection blossomed, one that spoke of shared solitude, of battles fought in silence, and of an unyielding hope that defied the harshness of their realities. Hannah watched with a mix of wonder and quiet elation as the wild creature, now named Shadow in the recesses of her heart, accepted the fruit with deliberate care. Though his coat was tangled and dusted with the remnants of his wild existence, it caught the light in fleeting moments, hinting at an inner vibrancy that belied his caution. His eyes, still guarded yet softened by the tender act, seemed to reflect a silent acknowledgment of her presence, a mutual recognition that both had been scarred by life's cruelty, yet still possessed the strength to endure. In that solitary clearing by the creek, the boundaries between human and wild creature blurred into insignificance. Hannah's gaze lingered on the steady rhythm of Shadow's measured steps, the quiet determination in his stance echoing her own unspoken vow to keep moving forward. The fragile ritual of these encounters, repeated day after day, began to weave itself into the fabric of her existence. Each visit to the creek became a moment of gentle healing, a silent exchange of trust and hope that slowly mended the fractures of her heart. As the morning waned, the forest's symphony carried on, each rustle of leaves, every whispered note of the breeze, and the continuous murmur of the creek composing a quiet anthem of renewal. Hannah gathered her thoughts amid the natural chorus, feeling a tentative optimism stir within her. In that fleeting period of solitude, she allowed herself to believe that, perhaps, the wild horse was not merely a creature of the untamed wilderness, but a living symbol of resilience, a reminder that beauty and strength could emerge from even the harshest trials. With the sun climbing higher and the gentle warmth beginning to replace the cool shadows, Hannah reluctantly tore her eyes away from Shadow. Yet, even as she turned to retrace her steps back toward the cabin, a part of her remained rooted in that moment, anchored by the delicate bond that had blossomed between her and the wild horse. It was a connection both unexpected and deeply transformative, a spark of hope kindled in the midst of isolation and loss. Back in the distance, as she walked away, the image of the dark, watchful eyes of the horse lingered in her mind, a constant reminder that even in the solitude of the wilderness, the possibility of connection and healing was never far away. And with each step, Hannah carried with her the silent promise of tomorrow, a promise that the quiet moments shared by the creek would eventually lead to something enduring and life-affirming. Back at the cabin, the morning had matured into a gentle rhythm as the sun climbed higher, its golden beams filtering through the narrow windows and warming the time-worn wooden floorboards. The soft light illuminated every corner of the modest living space, where the echoes of last night's quiet solitude still lingered. In this serene ambience, the remnants of a long, painful journey were interwoven with the promise of a new day. It was here that the subtle shifts in Hannah Reed's demeanor began to reveal themselves in ways that had not been apparent before. As the warmth of the morning seeped into the room, Hannah sat at the small kitchen table, still lost in thought about the extraordinary events of the previous day. The plate of scrambled eggs before her, though simple in appearance, had long ceased to be a focal point. Instead, her mind wandered to the vivid memory of the wild horse, the dark, watchful creature whose presence had kindled a spark of hope within her. Her father, John Reed, a man whose weathered hands and calm gaze bore the wisdom of many hard-fought battles with nature and fate, observed her silently from across the table. Every crease on his face and every quiet sigh in the stillness of the kitchen spoke of his deep concern, even as he tried to preserve the fragile peace that now seemed to hover in the space between them. "Are you heading out today?" he asked in a tone that was both gentle and probing, a question that had become a ritual in their quiet mornings together. His voice carried not only the pragmatic concern of a father, but also a subtle invitation for Hannah to share the burdens of her heart. Yet, as she met his steady gaze, Hannah offered only a soft shrug. There was an unspoken language between them, a language of silences, half-formed words, and the quiet resilience that had been forged over the past year. She had learned to keep her secrets, especially those born of pain and hope alike, locked away in the delicate corridors of her memory. The image of the wild horse, whose eyes had met hers with a look of unguarded understanding, was one such secret, a treasure too fragile to be unburdened in mere words. Her father's expression softened further, the lines on his face deepening with concern and quiet understanding. He had long been her anchor since the accident that had claimed her leg, yet even his unwavering presence could not completely dispel the shadows of isolation that clung to her. "Be careful out there," he murmured after a pause, his voice carrying the weight of both caution and hope. Those few words, simple as they were, resonated deeply within Hannah, stirring a tumult of emotions: gratitude, longing, and the silent promise of a future uncharted by fear. Hannah nodded in response, her eyes briefly flickering with an emotion that she could not quite name, a mixture of defiance and fragile optimism. With measured resolve, she rose from the table and reached for the jacket draped over a chair, its fabric softened by years of use and the memory of countless adventures. The act of dressing, of donning that familiar garment and securing her prosthetic leg, was both a daily ritual and a reaffirmation of her will to continue despite the pain. As she stepped away from the safety of the cabin, the threshold between the warmth of her home and the wild uncertainty of the mountains beckoned her forward. Outside, the world was a tapestry of light and shadow, a living portrait of nature's duality. The forest, with its towering pines and the gentle murmur of distant birds, wrapped around the cabin like a protective cloak. Yet beyond this veneer of tranquility lay the untamed wilderness, a realm of shifting moods and unpredictable forces. Hannah's footsteps were soft on the familiar wooden porch as she ventured into this realm, each step measured, each breath filled with the crisp, invigorating scent of pine and damp earth. Her mind, still echoing with the silent communion from the creek, wandered back to the tender moment when she had encountered the wild horse. The memory was vivid, the way his dark eyes had locked onto hers, the fragile boundary between fear and trust that had been silently negotiated in the space between them. That moment had imprinted itself on her heart, a spark of connection in an otherwise solitary existence. Even now, as she walked away from the cabin, that memory provided a gentle reassurance, a reminder that even in the midst of isolation there could be unexpected companionship and hope. In the quiet sanctuary of the forest, Hannah's thoughts turned introspective. The wilderness offered her solace, a temporary reprieve from the constant reminders of loss and the challenges of living with a prosthetic limb. Here, among the cool shadows and dappled sunlight, she could simply be. There were no prying eyes, no whispered judgments, only the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. It was in this environment that she began to feel, for the first time in a long while, the faint stirrings of peace, a delicate equilibrium between the sorrow of the past and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Yet, as she wandered deeper into the forest, her thoughts were interrupted by the distant murmur of life beyond her solitary reverie. The call of the wild, the echo of footsteps on a well-trodden trail, and the faint rustle of voices reminded her that she was not entirely alone in this vast, indifferent landscape. It was in that moment, as if summoned by fate itself, that the memory of the wild horse surged to the forefront of her consciousness once more. The image of his dark, soulful eyes, the wild, untamed mane, and the cautious yet hopeful stance he had assumed by the creek, all came flooding back, intertwining with the quiet resolve that had taken root within her. Torn between the desire to return to the comforting familiarity of the cabin and the irresistible pull of the wild unknown, Hannah paused at the edge of the tree-line. Here, in the liminal space between home and wilderness, the threads of her two worlds converged. The memory of the horse, a symbol of resilience, freedom, and an unspoken promise, glowed softly in her mind, urging her onward. In that suspended moment, every sense was heightened. The crisp air, the gentle sway of the pines, and the silent, powerful beat of her own heart that seemed to echo the steady rhythm of nature itself. Resolutely, she turned back, not to the warmth of the cabin but toward the heart of the forest, where her destiny awaited. Each step forward was imbued with both determination and a fragile hope that had slowly begun to mend the fractures of her past. With her father's gentle admonition echoing in her ears, Hannah pressed on, her spirit buoyed by the thought that somewhere in the vast wilderness, a kindred soul, embodied in the silent gaze of the wild horse, awaited her discovery. The path ahead was uncertain, marked by the soft murmur of the forest and the promise of unknown adventures, but for the first time in a long time, Hannah felt ready to embrace it all. As the day progressed, the interplay of light and shadow deepened, mirroring the complex tapestry of emotions that now defined her journey. Every step carried the weight of memory and the spark of newfound courage, a delicate balance that promised healing even as it demanded sacrifice. And though the challenges of the past were not easily erased, the quiet companionship of the wilderness and the lingering promise of the wild horse's silent understanding offered her a glimpse of a future where hope might flourish once again. In that intricate dance between solitude and connection, Hannah Reed continued onward, her resolve firm and her heart quietly alight with the promise of renewal. The world outside the cabin, with all its rugged beauty and hidden perils, had become both a crucible and a sanctuary, a place where every step, every breath, and every heartbeat was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. In the waning light of that eventful day, as the storm's fury finally gave way to a tentative calm, Hannah found herself standing in the cool, quiet aftermath on the rugged mountain trail. The tumult of the past hours, of harrowing descents, desperate rescues, and fragile hopes, had left its indelible mark upon her. Now, with the air cleared and the first stars timidly piercing the darkening sky, a sense of serene finality settled over the landscape. Hannah leaned against the weathered fence of the ranger station's porch, her prosthetic leg now resting more comfortably as if it, too, had begun to adapt to this new rhythm of life. At her side, Shadow, the wild horse who had become her steadfast companion and silent confidant, stood with an almost regal composure. His glossy black coat, now free of the relentless rain, caught the gentle luminescence of the moonlight, and his eyes, deep and knowing, mirrored the profound transformation that had taken root in both their hearts. The quiet murmur of the night was punctuated only by the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze and the occasional distant call of nocturnal birds. In that hushed moment, the chaotic memories of the storm and the perilous rescue began to fade, replaced by a delicate, enduring hope. Hannah's thoughts wandered over the arduous journey that had brought her here, from the desolate solitude of her cabin to the wild, untamed communion with Shadow by the creek, from the relentless ache of loss to the fierce determination to protect those in need. Each step along the treacherous trails, every whispered reassurance to a frightened hiker, and every silent exchange with the wild creature had woven together a tapestry of courage, resilience, and redemption. Her mind replayed the image of Shadow accepting the humble offerings at the creek, the soft nicker that spoke of trust and understanding, and the unspoken promise that had blossomed between them in that sacred clearing. That connection had grown steadily, transforming from a tentative greeting into a ritual of healing and mutual solace, a bond that transcended the boundaries of human and animal, of pain and perseverance. In Shadow, Hannah had found not only a symbol of the wilderness's raw beauty but also a reflection of her own indomitable spirit. His quiet strength, the cautious tilt of his head, and the unyielding glimmer in his eyes had become her anchor in the midst of life's turbulent storms. Now, as the cool night air mingled with the lingering warmth of a day defined by both struggle and triumph, Hannah's heart felt lighter. The burden of loss, though not entirely lifted, was now tempered by the knowledge that she was not alone. The mountain, with its rugged peaks and whispering pines, had borne witness to her pain and her healing. And in that timeless landscape, the bond between her and Shadow had grown into something almost sacred, a living testament to the power of hope, the beauty of resilience, and the transformative nature of connection. Her father's words, echoing from earlier in the day, "Be careful out there," resonated softly in her ears, mingling with the quiet gratitude she now felt for every challenge that had led her to this very moment. In the flickering light of the station's modest lamp, Hannah allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, a silent acknowledgment of the journey's cost and its immeasurable worth. The memory of every step taken, every trial endured, and every tear shed was now a part of her story, a story that had the power to inspire others. It was a story of a girl who had once been defined by loss but had since discovered that even in the harshest landscapes, beauty and strength could be found. As she gazed out across the peaceful darkness, the distant silhouettes of the mountains stood as timeless guardians of her newfound spirit. The night sky, slowly deepening into a canvas of velvety blues and inky blacks, offered no promises of certainty, but it did whisper the possibility of renewal. In that quiet moment, Hannah made a silent vow to cherish this fragile peace and to carry forward the lessons learned from every twist and turn of her journey. She would honor the memory of her past, the sacrifices made along the way, and the unspoken bond she now shared with Shadow. Together, they had not only weathered the storm but had emerged transformed, a living legacy of hope and resilience. In a final act of quiet defiance against the hardships that had once seemed insurmountable, Hannah stepped away from the station and toward the open trail once more. Shadow moved gracefully beside her, his presence a comforting constant in the shifting tapestry of night. With each deliberate step, the weight of uncertainty lifted just a little more, replaced by the steady, unyielding beat of a heart determined to forge a better tomorrow. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, standing on the precipice of a new dawn, Hannah felt a deep, abiding certainty that even the darkest storms eventually give way to light, and that every scar, whether on the body or the soul, carries the promise of rebirth. As the stars emerged in earnest overhead, Hannah paused, her gaze softening as she looked once more to Shadow. Their eyes met in a silent, mutual understanding, a conversation unspoken yet profound. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a blend of gratitude and quiet awe. The horse responded with a gentle nicker, as if affirming that their bond was eternal. Together, they had rewritten the narrative of loss into one of hope, transforming pain into a stepping stone toward a future where strength and compassion reigned supreme. In that final luminous moment, as the first hints of dawn began to edge the horizon, Hannah felt whole. Not because every wound had healed or every challenge had been overcome, but because she had discovered the resilience to rise above adversity and the courage to embrace a future filled with possibility. And so, with the gentle promise of a new day on the horizon and the unwavering companionship of Shadow by her side, Hannah Reed stood ready to face whatever might come next. Thank you for listening. If you have been moved by this tale of strength, resilience, and hope, please subscribe now for more captivating stories coming your way tomorrow.